design, one of the HDB projects that he's designed. Then we have Alan Mei-Ling Tian talking about the culture, the etiquette, and so forth. We have Sonia Miyashiro, who's going to be talking about travel nuts and bolts. And then we are going to have Todd Takuchi as well, who I think is not here yet. He was a former tenant of HDB. All right, so let's get started. Does anyone know where Singapore is on this map?
Bottom of Malaysia.
Bottom of Malaysia, very good. Foreign Service Officer. Bottom of Malaysia, okay, which is kind of, it's next to Indonesia, the bottom right-hand corner. Spatially, this is what Singapore, this is the size of Singapore. It's less than half the size of Oahu. It has over 5 times as many people as Oahu. All right, this is a better view of Singapore. So why is Singapore significant? For hundreds of years, there was really only one significance to Singapore, and that word, in one word, is trade. 1/4 of the world's trade goes through this body of water called the Strait of Malacca. That's been true for centuries, by the way. Basically, it's the quickest way to get to, from the Far East, China and so forth, to the Middle East or Europe. And you know, one of my favorite quotes is, it's one of these ancient quotes, whoever is the Lord of Malacca has his hand on the throat of Venice. This has been an incredibly important trade route forever, and Singapore is right at the entrance to it. This is what it looks like. It's the world's busiest, you know, trading route, and it's very, very narrow. So it's, you know, thousands of ships a month. All right. So over the years, lured by trade, this economy, there have developed the 3 main ethnic groups of Singapore are the ones that you see here. We have Chinese, we have Indian in the middle, and we have Malay in the hat, and Eurasian as well on the left-hand side, but that's very small. So the 3 main ones are going to be the Chinese, the Indians, and the Malays. The vast majority, as you can see, are Chinese, but there are significant Malay and Indian populations. Another main difference between them is that there are religious differences. The Chinese tend to be Buddhist, the Indians tend to be Hindu, and the Malays tend to be Muslim. And this is a really key factor, right? The nation of Singapore would not exist if not for the fact that these ethnic groups didn't get along, and we'll get a little bit more of that later. But it's like it drives. It's not polite to say it in Singapore, but this ethnic tension is behind so much of why Singapore is like it is, and what it does, and its policies, including HDB. All right, a little bit about their politics. The Singaporean parliament has 91 seats that are elected, of which 82 are currently occupied by the People's Action Party. The People's Action Party has been the majority party in Singapore since 1959, since before they got independence. And as you can see, though, the state legislature of Hawaii is 70 out of 76 Democratic. Our Democratic majority is actually even larger than Singapore's PAP majority. And our Democratic majority has actually been in office even longer than the PAP majority in Singapore. And who knows who this gentleman is?
Lee Kuan Yew.
Very good, Lee Kuan Yew, the founder of the People's Action Party, and he was the Prime Minister of Singapore for many, many decades. He is incredibly important to the political history of Singapore, and he recently passed away, I think 4 or 5 years ago. His son is the current Prime Minister. Okay, so this is Lee Kuan Yew as a kid. This is when he was 4 years old, attending his aunt's wedding. So as you can see from this photograph, you can see from the lavish amount of jewelry his aunt is wearing, he is from a crazy rich Asian family. This is a very wealthy family. And back then, it was a British colony. And so what they would do is they would send their kids abroad. So I forget whether he went to Cambridge or Oxford, but he went to one of the two. He was Harry Lee. His English was, his Chinese was not that great. English was his main language. He went to university in England. He was like as, you know, westernized, as anglicized as like any of us in this room. Until he goes back to Singapore and gets involved in politics. And this is him as a young man. He actually started out as a socialist. PAP is still a socialist party. And here he is with a famous gentleman from Malaysia agitating for independence. Merdeka means independence in Malay, and he's one of these rabble-rousers. He wants independence from the United Kingdom. And he succeeds. So in 1963, Singapore gets independence. And so, 1961. So Singapore is actually, due to historical reasons, part of a separate colony from the peninsula of Malaya, where it is located just offshore from. And so in 1960, it didn't make sense for the two of them to be separate, so in 1963, the two of them merged. And Malaya, the peninsula, added the letters SI for Singapore, stands for Singapore, and became Malaysia. Just kind of a fun fact, if you didn't know that. All right, and that happens in 1963, all right? Just 1 year later, massive riots break out, okay? And the riots are racial in nature. The Malays and the Chinese don't get along. And the Malays in Malaya are the majority there, but there's a large Chinese majority on the peninsula. And in Singapore, the Chinese are the majority, but there's a large Malay minority, as we already discussed. So lots of people die in these clashes, and guess what happens? Singapore gets kicked out of Malaysia after only 2 years. Okay? And if you just think about it for a second, how many times in history has any country or empire voluntarily given up territory? Not that, it's hard to think of too many instances, right? If there wasn't a war or an insurgency or whatever, right? And so that shows you how intense the racial tension was. Also, though, I should say that no one expected that Singapore was viable as an independent country. Everyone thought that Singapore was going to have to come back on its knees and give Malaysia better terms to, reunite with Singapore. This was a personally devastating moment for Lee Kuan Yew. He was a very ambitious dude. His dream in life was to become the Prime Minister of Malaysia. And now that Singapore was separated, and now that the ethnic tensions had boiled over to such a point, he actually famously, while being interviewed on national television, he starts crying. And his dreams have been dashed. So why is Singapore not a viable independent country? Well, it starts as a basic matter with water. So in Hawaii and Oahu, we talk about carrying capacity a lot. I know a lot of you folks are in the development community. People are always like, oh, we've reached our carrying capacity. On Oahu, we use only half of our sustainable water supply. In Singapore, then as now, they use about 200% of their sustainable water supply. They don't have enough water, okay? And so to this day, Singapore gets half its water from Malaysia, from the Johor River, which gets piped in, and which the Malaysians have, over the years, repeatedly threatened to cut off. In 1959, there was a huge fire in one of these local squatter communities. A lot of people died in this fire too, so there was a huge housing shortage in Singapore. Also, you can see here, further talking about the ethnic tension issue, so green is it's Muslim. Right, so we tend to think of Singapore as like a London or like Switzerland, a rich, kind of secure country. It's not. It's like an Israel, right? It's to the north is Malaysia, which hates them, and then in every other direction they're surrounded by this sea of green that is Indonesia, which hates them even more. And Singapore is this tiny little island. It's basically defenseless. So Lee Kuan Yew has a really tough job when independence happens in 1965. And this is actually an anti-Chinese riot in Indonesia in 1998. So again, the Indonesians don't get along with the majority Chinese in Singapore. All right, so just talking about that housing shortage. So remember there was this big fire, there's a shortage of adequate housing, and Singapore is now independent, right? So Singapore is now independent, but the people can leave, right? They can go to Hong Kong, they can go to Australia, they can go to the US, and many of them did, because it was such an unstable place at that time. So Lee Kuan Yew launches this incredibly ambitious and massive housing policy. And it starts with the Central Provident Fund. So the British had actually set this up before independence. It's called the CPF, and it's a 37% mandatory savings. So the way that we have, mandatory Medicare and Social Security withholdings, they have this in Singapore. 23% for housing, 8% for healthcare, and 6% retirement. You don't have a choice. Every man, woman, and child. Okay. So every month, every paycheck, this money is being withheld for you by the government. So you take that money, and then you meet certain qualifications. you're either married and at least 21, you get married and you're at least 21, or you're single and you're at least 35. You don't own any other real property, and you will be an owner-occupant of this unit. You can have previously owned real property, but you have to dispose of it within 6 months. And then finally, you have to be a Singapore citizen or permanent resident. Okay? So you've been working and saving, you've now met these criteria, and then you go to the Housing and Development Board. Okay? This is their public housing agency, so they're HHFDC. And HDB, so HHFDC has, in the US, we measure our housing units, maybe in the hundreds or thousands over a period of time. But in Singapore, they build housing in just vast quantities, right? So in HDB, in the decade of the 1980s, that was their peak decade, they built over 300,000 units. That's about 30+ thousand a year on average. More recently, they're building about 20,000 a year on average. And this is a huge amount, even for a populous country like Singapore. It's 82% of the population lives in it. Here you can see, because it's for sale, it's not for rent, they've achieved a 90% home ownership rate compared to 63% nationwide here in the US, and only 57% here in Hawaii. All right, so what do you get for your money? This is the most common unit they have. It's called a 4-room unit. For those of you coming to Singapore, you'll get to walk through a model unit like this. It's 3-bedroom, 2-bath. They call it 4-room. I guess they count the living room as one of the rooms. 969 square feet, new construction. And no waiting period. You can move in tomorrow. How much do you think this costs? Well, how much do you think this would cost in Hawaii? 700,000? 700,000? Yeah. So probably even more, right? We have our in Hawaii you're talking probably 800 or more, right? In Singapore they sell you this for 180,000 US dollars. Okay, and there are a lot of areas in which this is not comparable because, for instance, we have labor unions. They have Bangladeshi migrant workers who build these units. So it's not comparable, but they are able to deliver this unit at an extremely low price at a population density that is 10 times that of Hawaii, right? So, they would ask me, well, so why does Hawaii have such a housing shortage? It's because you don't have enough land. And my response was, well, we say we don't have enough land, right? But it's all relative. All right, and plus, in addition to the units themselves, they're integrated with child care facilities, they're integrated with senior centers. You actually do kind of get a lot of community amenities here. And they're not just towers of apartments either. You also have a lot of commercial and retail in the town centers. This is Topaio Town Center, which we'll be touring. And as you can see, there's a really vibrant, row of shops here where people can, get their cell phones or whatever. There are also transportation hubs. They really deeply integrate transportation, public transportation, into these units. So this is also Topaio, and they have this huge bus depot there. All right, this question about resale. So what if you want to resell your flat that you just bought for $180,000? In Hawaii, this is extremely controversial because there's this idea that in Hawaii, you get one of these reserved units, maybe it's taxpayer subsidized, but then you win a lottery, and then you literally get hundreds of thousands of dollars in windfall profits off of that. So in Singapore, actually, they have a similar issue, right? These units trade on the secondary market after 5 years. You can sell it after 5 years, and you can make a huge profit. The record-setting units, most of which are in the Pinnacle, which we'll be visiting, are over $1 million. And they didn't sell at only 180. They may have sold at 500. But this is a big windfall profit for these people. So why are they okay with this situation? 3 reasons. First of all, it's fair because everyone gets a chance to buy this unit, right? In Hawaii, not all of us can buy, reserved housing. It's just very limited supply. But in Singapore, they build enough so that everyone can do it. So everyone can buy and flip. Second of all, you still need a place to live, right? So if you flip your unit, where are you going to live, right? And so you can only buy one of these HDB units, and so you may get a big windfall, but the private market is really expensive, and usually it doesn't make sense for most people to do that because $1 million from the private market doesn't actually get you that much in Singapore. And third, incentive, right? Remember, this is the land of crazy rich Asians. How do you get rich people to live in public housing? You give them a great deal, right? And it turns out that rich people love a great deal just as much as everybody else, and that's their incentive to get the crazy rich Asians to live alongside, middle class, lower middle class, working class people. All right, so as a result of these policies, they have this incredible, the whole world recognizes this is one of the greatest public housing programs in the world. All right, let me just add right now, and I didn't get into it a little bit earlier, but what they do. So why do they have such a spectacular public housing program with 82% of the population is residents? Yes, they had a housing shortage that they needed to fix back in 1959. Yes, they want to provide a good quality of life for their people, but why do they have to keep doing this, right? They're a dictatorship. They don't have to listen to neighborhood boards or whatever. They can continue to allow public housing to be built, or even private developers just to build housing, right? The answer is back to that ethnic tension. The reason why there's so much public housing in Singapore, even though they've corrected the housing shortage, is because they want the three ethnicities to live in harmony, side by side. Right? They want the Chinese, the Malays, and the Indians to get along. And now generations have gone by, this policy has been in effect for over 50 years. Generations have gone by where literally that's true. Each floor of each HDB unit has a minimum quota of Chinese, Malays, and Indians, a level of social engineering that we would find, it's forcibly integrated. Which we would, I think, in America find really, it violates fair housing, for one. So, but we would not like that. And even though all this time has gone by, the ethnic tension is still a real issue. It's just beneath the surface. It's kind of impolite to talk about. You can ask about it in the meetings, and they will give you all kinds of responses and so forth. But this ethnic tension is always there. Okay? And I grew up in Hawaii, right? Most of us grew up in Hawaii, and I just assumed that when different kinds of people got together, they did what human beings do, which is to make babies together. And so we have the world's highest rate of interethnic and interracial marriage. Over 40% of our population is Papa in some way. And for us, it's completely normal. It is total. We don't even think about it. The idea of a Chinese person and a Japanese person getting married. That's not even, no one would even think that's an issue. But in Singapore, despite decades of literally growing up next door to someone of a different race, they still don't intermarry. And actually, Singapore's not the only one, right? Across the United States, black people and white people have lived side by side for hundreds of years, and they have not kind of intermarried the way that we have, right? And residential segregation is a huge issue in the United States, but not in Hawaii. We have Kailua, we have Waipahu, but it's not like the mainland, right? And so Singapore is ahead of us in virtually every way, but I would say to them, what they could learn from us is this interracial, interethnic harmony, which I suppose we would call aloha. And in that respect, we are ahead of Singapore, we are ahead of the rest of the United States, we're ahead of virtually every country in the world. And we never think about it that way, but we found this secret sauce to different groups of people getting along that no one else has really figured out. So anyway, in my opinion, that's the big background issue that's behind everything in Singapore, is this racial tension issue. And they've done this huge public housing program for how many years, and they still haven't corrected it. So, be thankful that we only have to correct a housing shortage. We don't have this racial and ethnic tension issue that they do. Okay, so let's walk through the itinerary a little bit. So first, we're arriving, or those of us who are taking these flights are arriving very late at night on Wednesday, the 22nd of May. Okay, and the flight that I'll be on, that many of us will be on, arrives at 12:25 a.m. And so it's going to be a little bit tough, but we're going to get started the next morning, Thursday the 23rd, with a briefing at HDB. We've allotted 3 hours because this is maybe the single most important, commitment of the entire itinerary. And so not only are we going to get a briefing of HDB, I should mention, so those of us who are with the group, we're staying at the Shangri-La Hotel. Has anyone been to the Shangri-La Hotel in Singapore? You have, okay. So you guys know, this is it's spectacular. It's huge and it's wildly luxurious, as you can see. It's like the Hilton Hawaiian Village on steroids. It's so luxurious that Donald Trump stayed here when he met with Kim Jong-un. It's kind of a famous hotel in international relations circles because there's something called the Shangri-La Dialogue, where all the defense ministers of all these Asian countries, including the US Secretary of Defense, they meet every year at this hotel. It's kind of a famous place. Okay, so hopefully you've gotten a good rest at this wildly luxurious hotel. So the next morning, we're going to visit HDB, and this is their show, the My Nice Home gallery. They have a gallery of like model units of each of the configurations, so you can actually walk through it and you can actually see what it's like to live in one of these units. And it's very nice, and so we'll be visiting that in the morning. We'll have lunch. We also have a briefing at the Central Provident Fund, which is that forced savings program that I was talking about earlier, at 2:30, and that's from 2:30 to 4, and then we have a little bit of a break. We have 3 hours of a break because you probably will be zonked after all your flying and your jet lag. And then we're doing our welcome dinner at this restaurant, which is called Blue Ginger in Chinatown. Has anyone been to Blue Ginger? It's well known in Singapore. It's very nice, and it serves this very authentic, very traditional Peranakan cuisine. Peranakan is their word for the Chinese of this part of the world. And so it's going to be very nice. You guys are going to have a really nice dinner that first night. All right, the second night. The second day, this is going to be a really busy day. And it's going to be even busier than what you see here because at 8:30, we're actually going to do a briefing with the Land Transport Authority, which is their, I guess equivalent of HART. And so this is actually going to start at 8:30 in the morning. So you guys should definitely crash as soon as you can after our nice dinner. All right, so we're first starting at the Land Transport Authority, which is still in the works, so that's why it's not in here yet. Our next meeting is with the Senior Parliamentary Secretary for the Ministry of National Development and Home Affairs, the Home Affairs Ministry. And I don't know really how their system works, so I don't know where she's on the totem pole. I think she's just one notch below the elected officials. I think she's maybe the most senior civil servant in those two departments. And then we're going to go to the Urban Redevelopment Authority and the Singapore City Gallery Tour. So the Urban Redevelopment Authority is probably like, I don't know that we have one in Hawaii. It's maybe like HCDA or something. And they have this gallery where they have a full-size, scale model of the whole country. And so you'll get to a sense of like how they've planned out their country. We'll have lunch, and then we'll go here, which is the Pinnacle at Duxton, one of the most famous housing developments in Singapore. It's 7 50-story towers that are linked by these sky bridges. It has a lot of mixed use. There's a restaurant in the bottom right-hand corner. And this is one of the most desirable public housing projects in Singapore. It's right in Chinatown. That neighborhood is called Duxton. Very expensive, desirable neighborhood, and it's kind of what I personally might imagine for what we could do at Aloha Stadium here in Hawaii, or one of these other sites. But I don't. But actually, I don't. Since then, I have some other thoughts that I'll get into later, maybe next week. But I don't know that this is the ideal model for Hawaii. But it is a model for Hawaii. Yes.
How tall is it?
50 stories. So we think of Singapore as like all these tall skyscrapers.
500 feet.
Maybe, yeah. We think of Singapore as all these tall skyscrapers, but actually the tallest building in the whole country is only 56 stories. And I will just observe as a note, 801 South Street, which I know some of you folks may have been involved with, is 47 stories. And it's not luxury, it's just a normal condo building. And we don't, there are people who think, who think that's too tall, but I think a lot of people in Hawaii just don't even realize how tall it is. It's very uncommon in Singapore, in Manhattan, even in Hong Kong, to live in a 47-story residential tower. But this is one of the few examples in Singapore of that. Okay, and then in the evening we have, I think we're going to have on Friday evening a self-organized optional activity, and we've been able to get a reservation. I don't know where to give away these slots. Of 10 people, so I guess we'll have to find some way of like a lottery or something. And we're going to be visiting 2 of the world's best bars. These have been ranked on the world's best bar list. This is 28 Hong Kong Street. This is Atlas Bar. They're very, very nice. And I guess Singapore's having its craft cocktail. That's really taking off right now.
That says Aaron.
All right, so Saturday. So Saturday, you're finally going to be able to have a rest because on Friday you've been run ragged all day long. So on Saturday, we actually have the morning completely free, and in the afternoon we're gonna have a city tour. And we're actually working on the destinations for that city tour right now. But it'll be, I think it should include these destinations: Chinatown, Little India, Arab Street,
Yeah, I know.
Gardens by the Bay, and then a dinner at a hawker center. Okay, so initially, you know, if you take a typical tour of Singapore, you might visit the government buildings, you might visit kind of whatever, like the city hall or whatever, which is fine. But remember, this ethnic thing is huge in Singapore, and I don't think we can fully understand what that's like unless we actually go into these communities. So the British actually, before Lee Kuan Yew, the British actually had a policy of separating the three races because they didn't want ethnic tension, they didn't want trouble. So they actually separated them. This is the Chinatown in Singapore, which is, I mean, it's a kind of crazy to think that a city with 74% Chinese has a Chinatown, but there it is, you know, it's the Chinese area. This is one of the famous temples there we might be able to visit, a Buddhist temple. We're also gonna try to visit Little India, where it's a mostly Muslim population, and they have these beautiful, Hindu population. It's one of the beautiful Hindu temples that they have. It's also a very trendy area from what I understand. And this is the Arab Street, which is the Malay area. They have this very nice mosque that you can walk around and tour. Also kind of another gentrifying area. All of these areas are kind of gentrifying now, so they're kind of cool neighborhoods too, in addition to being, you know, very traditional. In the evening, there's this, you guys might have seen this. Has anyone seen these super trees before? Yeah, so these are part of the Gardens by the Bay, which is reclaimed land right next to the casino, the Marina Bay Sands. And at night they have this spectacular light show. And we can also go to a hawker center. This is one of the hawker centers nearby. It's called like Gluttons by the Bay or something. And it's apparently touristy, but you'll get a chance to sample their cuisine, which is very famous and which they're very proud of. And I think there's a lot of spicy food, but as you can see, there's a lot of non-spicy food. Anyone know what any of these are? I actually don't really know what most of these are. Delicious. It looks delicious, right? Yeah. Yeah, none of the really famous ones are here. Oh, I guess this chicken, this poached chicken, yeah, it's the Hainan chicken rice. I don't know what other. That thing on the top is like a tamale or something like that. Okay, and our last day is going to have these three items on it. The first is, so the MRT is the subsidiary of the Land Transport Authority that we're probably going to see on Friday instead of Sunday. So you guys should be able to wake up relatively late, and then we're going to tour the airport. So I want people to see it for a couple of reasons. This is the new Jewel Changi, just opened like 2 weeks ago. Okay, this is a shopping center that's attached to their airport. And Singapore Changi Airport is it's been ranked the best in the world for like 8 straight years now. And I actually disagree with that, which is why I'm going to take you. I think Hong Kong is better, and I'm going to take you guys to Hong Kong. But you guys can decide for yourself. It's this super glitzy thing. This is the tallest indoor waterfall in the world. There's, it's spectacular. There's a poke shop in there. And I know our airports here in Hawaii have been an issue. For a long time. This is Terminal 4. This is the terminal that we're going to fly out of. It's brand new also. And this is the security area. Everything in Terminal 4 is automated. You don't talk to a person when you check in. You don't have to talk to a person when you do your security thing too. And I just wanted to share this because, so you put your stuff into the tray and you send it into that like scanning device, right? Just like you would in the US. But on top of it is this huge LED screen that changes, right? So it shows you all the different destinations that you can fly to from Singapore. And it's dynamic. As you can see, this is changing from one scene to another. And I just thought it was so brilliant because, when you're stressed out or whatever at the security line, that's designed for you to like distract you, to like turn your attention away from the long line in front of you and up to this screen so you're not stressed out by the long line, which I just think is one small way that we could, that doesn't have to be expensive, that we could do it, here in Hawaii. And then we're off to Hong Kong. This is like the Cafe Pacific, one of the world's best airports. Okay, and that's it for me. And so I think we will next move to Gabriel Chen, who is getting set up now. Oh, here's Dean Sakamoto.
Hello?
Okay.
Yeah. Wait a minute. I'm sorry, let me work with the wall.
So anyway, Dean Sakamoto is an architect. He's a local architect. He's taught for many years.
Okay.
Went to Yale.
Did he go to Yale?
I think he was. I think he may have been teaching at Yale for a while.